pakṣo gantā gacchatīti yasya tasya prasajyate gamanena vinā gantā gantur gamanam icchataḥ.
Pakṣo gantā gacchatīti yasya tasya prasajyate gamanena vinā gantā gantur gamanam icchataḥ. MMK chapter 2 verse 10. For that goer, desirous of an act of going, who holds the view that a goer goes, there follows a goer without an act of going. So this verse is read in connection with the previous verse, where it says it is not at all possible for there to be a goer without an act of going. That's the teaching of emptiness. But in this verse he says, for that goer, desirous of an act of going, who holds the view that a goer goes, there does follow a goer with an act of without an act of going. So it's a humorous and ironic expression, really, of the self-righteous, compassionate, mindful leftist Buddhist who admires Eckhart Tolle's wisdom about the power of now. I must admit that I'm not a fan of the far right by any means. Let's say I hold them with mild contempt. But the Buddhists of the far left are the ones I really have it in for, because they're so self-righteous. They think that they're in their virtue signalling to each other of their own compassion. That it's groupthink. It's groupthink, and to the extent that there are Japanese Zen Buddhists who call themselves students of Master Kodo Soaki, or among that group, that's the biggest joke of them all. Because Master Kodo Soaki, if anything, was an individual. In a society which was very much group-oriented, Master Kodo stood for the individual as a Zen practitioner. And so the phrase he used in Japanese is group boke. So boke means, like if you got jet lag in Japanese, they call it jisa boke, time difference, lag. So group boke is that kind of a fuzziness. Boketeru, it means you're a little bit, your mind is fuzzy. So group boke is that kind of fuzziness associated with groupthink. So group boke is groupthink, really. So that the people on the left who virtue signal to each other their vegan Buddhist compassion, they don't realise that they're engaging in groupthink. They don't realise they're on the left. They think their teaching is the middle way. Well, they should study this teaching of Nagarjuna, and what he's targeting in this verse is both the left and the right, because both the left and the right think that there is a goer who goes. They think that there's a subject who does a verb, an agent who performs an action. The teaching of emptiness refutes that way of thinking. So, working from the Sanskrit, pakṣo gantā gacchatīti. So, iti is like quotation marks. So, gantā gacchati iti. So, gacchati plus iti, as in the previous verse, goes to gacchatīti. So, the part in quotation marks is gantā gacchati. The goer goes, or the goer is going. In the previous verse, I translated gantā tavad gacchati, A goer right now is going. And in this verse, a goer goes. Gantā, gacchatīti. That a goer goes. Then the first word of the verse is pakṣo, nominative singular masculine. And I've just done a commentary on the word pakṣo to do with taking sides or not taking sides. So pakṣo means side, but it also means view. So pakṣo gantā gacchatīti is the view that a goer goes. The view, pakṣo, that, iti, a goer goes. Gantā gacchati. A goer, gantā, goes, gacchati. So the second pada says yasya, tasya, and that mirrors verse 4. The second pada of verse 4 and the second pada of verse 10 are the same. Yasya, tasya, prasajyate. So yasya and tasya are genitive, and they mean for whom, for him, or of whom, of him. Prasajyate, it follows. So in this case, yasya tasya refers to of the view, being of the view. So pakṣo yasya means of whom there is the view. So pakṣo is nominative singular masculine. Nominative phrase often means there is. So there is the view, that, such and such. Yasya, of whom there is the view. So in English we'd say he who holds the view, one who holds the view. So one who holds the view, pakṣo yasya, that, iti, a goer, gantā, gacchati, goes, gacchati. So pakṣo gantā gacchatīti yasya tasya prasajyate. For one who holds the view that a goer goes, there follows, and then the next line, there follows a goer, gantā, without an act of going. Gamanena, vinā. So this is the same as the third pada of the previous verse, verse 9. Gamanena, vinā, gantā. A goer without an act of going. And then a kind of punchline is the fourth pada, which adds a note of humour, I think. Gantur is genitive singular of gantur, goer. So it's genitive because it goes with tasya in the second pada. So tasya gantur, for that goer. Tasya gantur, for that goer, yasya, of whom, pakṣo, there is a view, gantā gacchatīti, that a goer goes. And that goer is described as icchataḥ. Icchataḥ is the genitive, going with tasya and gantur, of icchat. And icchat is the present participle of the verb ish, which means to pursue, to seek, to long for, to wish, to desire. So icchataḥ is means desirous. Gantur icchataḥ means the goer, for the goer who is desirous, and then the object of ish is gamanam, the act of going, the act of visiting. So the person who holds the view that a goer goes is described as a goer desirous of an act of going. It's kind of comical. It suggests this kind of lonely, separated goer, the subject, the agent, who's bereft of an action. So he's a goer in want of an act of going, or a goer desirous of an act of going. So I translated the English in such a way that the verb order, the word order of the Sanskrit is completely lost. So I'll go through the English and relate it word by word to the Sanskrit. For that goer, tasya gantur, desirous of an act of going, gamanam icchataḥ, who, yasya, who holds, yasya, so of whom, the view, pakṣo, that iti, a goer, gantā, goes, gacchatīti, there follows, prasajyate, a goer, gantā, without an act of going, gamanena, vinā. For that goer, desirous of an act of going, who holds the view that a goer goes, there follows a goer without an act of going. So something about this verse reminds me of a story Master Dogen tells. I think it's in the first chapter of Shobogenzo, about the guy who dropped his sword over the side of a boat when he was rowing along a river, and he marked on the side of the boat the exact point where he dropped the sword, so he could come back, might be able to come back later and pick the sword up. So there's somehow a parallel there between that kind of stupidity and the goer who sort of sees himself as looking for an act of going, a goer without an act of going. But ridiculous though it seems, when we think about it on the basis of emptiness, that is how we can't help thinking. And if I relate it to my personal experience, or see, one of the four kinds of clinging in the dependent arising of suffering is called atmavadopadana, clinging to self stories. Atma means self, and vada means speaking or telling a story. And so there's something not enlightened about me telling a story in this way. Perhaps it serves as an example of what non-enlightenment is. But it's comical, you see, in this context, to talk about a search, you know, a lifetime in pursuit of action. You know, I met Nishijima Sensei in 1982, and he said we practice Zazen to study what action is. So I spent 35 years kind of seeking action. So it's comical, isn't it? Because it's really, that's the essence of ignorance. Putting action on a pedestal and pursuing it. But nevertheless, that's sort of what I've done. And as part of that process, the start of that process, I've already described a bit on these videos, was being afraid of something within myself that was stimulated by the presence of girls, and then finding freedom from that in doing weight training at lunchtimes, and then playing rugby. The more I did weight training, the better I was at rugby, as it happened. So rugby was an experience of being very self-conscious, in a sense, being aware of the whole body, but in the context of a team game, so that there's an irony there that I found liberation from taking sides against myself, which has been my habit sort of from childhood, partly due to immature vestibular reflexes, partly due to the way I was brought up by my parents. A very self-critical father who was critical of self and others, and a mother who was very critical of my father. So there was this psychological aspect from a very early age of taking sides against myself psychologically, and there's also vestibular reflexes fighting out against each other. So there's a physical lack of coordination, which is sort of taking sides against oneself. And I found liberation from that in playing rugby, in doing weight training, and also in friendships. And in particular, there was one very, very helpful friendship to me in my teens. That was with Kevin Grant. And there's a link with my MMK translation. In the spring of 2016, when I was really starting to get to grips in earnest with MMK, Kev sent me a message. I knew his son George Grant had been struggling with a brain tumour for over many years, but he was in the final stages, and it seemed like the prognosis was not good. And so I told Kev then that I would dedicate the MMK translations to George, and it kind of made me think, right, now is the time, after 35 years of translating the Buddha's teaching and practicing Zazen every day, it's time to step up to the plate and be useful to your old friend. And even more than that, before I went to King Edward's School in Birmingham, and because of the admission system there, I had to miss a year between primary school and secondary school. And so on the last day, my last day at Chilcote Primary School, where Kev Grant was my good friend already there, I left a little bit earlier than everybody else, because they were going to go. We were in Miss Cole's class, and everybody else was going to move up to Mr. Phillips' class. So there was a sort of orientation that they were going to have to Mr. Phillips' classroom, or Mr. Phillips himself. And so at that point, it was time for me to go. And everybody sang for "He's a Jolly Good Fellow," which was obviously very moving. And they'd also had a little whip round for me. A few halfpennies and old pennies had been collected in a hat. And so that afternoon, I took my dog a walk down the Dingles, a local sort of wild area down where we lived. And that was my establishment, I think, of the will to the truth, because without really knowing what it meant, I made a vow that I was going to save everybody, I was going to help everybody in the class. See, part of the background was that every morning we had a problem-solving game. I think that was in a previous class. In Mrs. Higgins' class, we had a problem-solving game every morning, and at the end of the week, the person who'd won would get a little treat, a sweet or something, and she had to make a rule that I was only allowed to win it every other week, because otherwise I was always good at solving that kind of intelligence I had in abundance for solving those kind of problems where it was a definite, like a mathematical problem or some other kind of riddle. My brain was always good at solving problems. It gave me confidence that despite lacking common sense in many ways, and various other faults, I was good at solving problems. So I made a vow, 10 years old, taking my dog a walk down the Dingles, that I was going to solve everybody's problem. I just had the confidence that I was able to do that. So spring of 2016, I began to think that here in MMK is the solution to everybody's problems, in a sense. But that's all very well, but what did it mean for Kevin? How was I going to help Kevin? him and his wife Barbara got their one son, George, who was a really talented individual. He also went to King Edward's School, Birmingham, but left it at 13 or 14 because he got a scholarship to the Royal Ballet down in London. But at the age of 16, he was diagnosed with this brain tumour. So it rendered him, it restricted his movement on one side. So he had to give up his ballet training. So Kevin Grant was always on my side, in the sense that going to King Edward's School, you were regarded as a snob. On the bus, people would look at you as a snob, and I didn't respond very well to that. I was self-conscious already, and so I made an effort to try and appear, to try and be not to be an intellectual snob. So that included being a supporter of Birmingham City football club, the Blues, and the 70s in Birmingham, being hard was the thing that, being a hard knock was the highest accolade you could have as a young teenage boy. So Kevin, who was like 6'4" when he was 15, was he had street credibility that I sort of lacked. But he, despite pulling my leg, he didn't regard me as a snob. We were good friends. We knocked around together. So that was, plus being a gentle giant as he was the kind of guy who played rugby and would fight hard in playing rugby. But then after the game was over, he'd always be one for shaking hands with the ref and being on friendly terms with the opposition. So Kevin himself, for me, was a really good friend. And a good friend is certainly someone whose side you're not against in a world where there was a lot of taking sides. So there was friendship, and there was playing rugby, where you take sides against an opposition, but you feel a teamwork, the team spirit with the people on your team, and then the referee blows the whistle and says no side. So there was something there that I understood. But I also understood that taking sides against the opposition was not the ultimate truth, let's put it that way. It wasn't the solution to the world's problems. Finding your own team to compete against an opposition, I somehow knew that wasn't the solution to the problem, the big solution to the big problem. And there again, Kev Grant and I used to go, we used to watch Birmingham City play. Kev's older brother Neil Grant used to drive us in his Morris Minor all over the place to watch Birmingham City play away, including, for example, at the FA Cup semi-final replay at Main Road in 1975. And I remember there when Fulham scored a very scrappy goal in the last minute of extra time to go through to the cup final, and we would have all been singing there, "You're gonna get your fucking heads kicked in," and part of me enjoyed that, losing oneself in the crowd, but another part of me knew again that it didn't sit well with me being part of the crowd. So I wanted to graduate from that, and the way I did that was through karate training, which I was very idealistic about. But I realised that karate was a way of pursuing enlightenment, a way of pursuing the truth. And originally my conception of enlightenment was again to turn it into a thing, exactly as Nagarjuna is taking the mickey out of in this verse. Whether you call it enlightenment or call it action itself, whatever, there's something out there that you want to realise, and that is ignorance itself. And to conceive of enlightenment as a thing that you can get your dirty paws on, that is, ironically enough, it's just ignorance. But that's what I did. And so I went to Japan in search of Zen and Zen enlightenment through the martial arts. That was my conception. I'd read books like Zen in the martial arts. Then I met Gudo Nishijima and sensed his belief in Master Dogen's teaching. He really did have true devotion and true belief to Master Dogen's teaching. That was undeniably true right through to the end of his life. He was totally devoted to Master Dogen's teaching, and he believed in the truth of Master Dogen's teaching. But I would suggest he didn't always understand it as clearly as he might have done. And so Master Dogen, for example, was steadfastly non-sectarian. People regard him as the founder of the Soto sect in Japan, but Master Dogen refuted the whole idea of there being this and that sect. And so Nishijima Sensei, of course, followed that teaching, or he subscribed to it. But so my sense, when I was 23, 1983, I again made a vow that I would devote myself, without counting the cost, to supporting Gudo Nishijima's translation of Shobogenzo. And I did that from 1983 to 1987. I pretty much did commit myself as best I could to helping him with that translation. But then, before we got to the finishing line, so my sense again was we were in it together. There was no, in a sense, there was no barrier between us. Well, he gave me money every month, and we were a team, a partnership, working towards doing the Shobogenzo translation. It wasn't really important who did what. It was a team effort. So you couldn't say it was 50-50. His words was 50-50, which I agreed to, but really you couldn't separate 50 and 50. It was a partnership. It was just a collaboration, a true collaboration. But then in 1997, I got the shock of my life when he stopped me. He stopped me. And what had happened the year before, and I hadn't really taken much notice of it because it was obviously rubbish. I'd come back to England to train as an Alexander technique teacher, and he perceived obviously that I'd gone over to the other side. That's how he saw it, because he wrote me a letter in which he said, "I hope you will come back to Buddhism," which is ridiculous, because the whole reason that I'd come back to train as an Alexander technique teacher is because I was pursuing action, I was pursuing enlightenment, and I sensed that there was wisdom in Alexander's discoveries that I wanted to understand in terms of what right posture was and what it wasn't. So that was a huge shock in 1997 when he stopped me translating on the basis that I'd gone over to the other side. And part of it was that in the way he taught me to practice Zazen was all about doing. Do this, do that, the other. In Alexander work, we're taught, don't do it, think. Don't just sit, think. And then sitting will do itself. Learn how to think. Alexander work is an exercise in learning what thinking is. So as I reported these facts back to him, you should understand that in the Second World War, as an officer of the Japanese Imperial Army. He received a little booklet that explained that what the war was about was they were fighting against Hakuji no Bunka, white man's civilization. Haku, white, jin, person, bunka, culture or civilization. And white men's civilization, they were taught, is intellectual civilization. So you got his basic, with very broad brushstrokes, his basic view of human civilization was intellectual white men and Jews, practical yellow people, and physically excellent black people. That's how he saw it. And that's what he was fighting for in World War II, against the intellectual white man's civilization. So this is something which I reacted against, because you'd often hear him talking to his Japanese students, gaijin, foreigners, by which he meant white people, they got brains like computers. They think very, very logically and rationally. So when we translate Shobogenzo into logically understandable English, that's how we'll save the world. For fuck's sake, I'd left my girlfriend back in England, you know. I was suffering every fucking day, like you wouldn't believe. Totally lovesick. And yet he was saying, white people have got brains like computers. Yeah? So it was not the easiest of times being the student of Gudo Nishijima in the 80s. For all his wisdom, it was by his own admission, sometimes very, very stupid. But he was always criticising him anyway for being idealistic and intellectual as opposed to practical, like a practical yellow person, which grated sorely with me. But when I went back to study the Alexander technique and told him his teaching about right posture was wrong, he wasn't open-minded enough to think that there was something in what I was saying. No, I'd gone over to the other side, and I'd reverted to the thinking of the intellectual white man. That's why I was saying that the key to Zazen was learning to think. So for him, that showed I'd gone to the other side. And then as confirmation of that, you see, so part of the problem was that I saw the Shobogenzo was me serving him. His name was on top. It was a collaboration. But the actual reality of it was the translation, just like this MMK translation. It took place inside my brain. That's how a translation works. The words go in Japanese and they're processed in one person's brain. They come out in English. So the actual work of the translation, you know, if you can separate it at all, which is probably not right to do, but I knew that I was doing the translation, but totally based on his teaching. So you couldn't separate it. It was a joint effort. But for him, it was his baby. You know, he'd been translating it into English for years before I arrived on the scene. So he couldn't accept that it wasn't his translation. And I thought it didn't matter. It didn't matter if he saw it like that. It wasn't important. But actually, it did matter practically, because to the extent that he thought it was his translation, he thought he was justified in stopping me before we got to the finishing line, since I'd gone over to the other side. And then he wanted to sort of take possession of the translation. So there was, for example, an email exchange where Gabrielle Linebacker, who did the translation of Shobogenzo from Japanese into German, you know, she pointed out to him that he was wrong. Really, she used to say it's his problem. You know, it's his problem, because I think he tried to claim ownership of the German one as well in his dotage. But Gabrielle intervened and said she just told the truth that no, he hadn't translated it into English by himself. That it was, it was a joint effort. It was as much my translation as his translation. At which point, I think his reply was something it's that question again to Gabrielle. Whose side are you on? He'd seen me as being not on his side, and then that wasn't helped by I saw an email that Michael Latchford had sent to Nishijima Sensei. Michael Latchford had been my couple of years my senior in Nishijima Sensei's group, and I read a sentence in there where Mike Latchford had written there, before Mike turned against you. Oh, what? Well, hello. When did I turn against him? But you could understand why if he was getting that kind of input from other people, why he'd feel justified in thinking I was on the other side. But if anybody kind of knew my life history, especially the vow I'd made in 1983 that I wasn't going to count the cost, and I was going to devote my life to serving him with the Shobogenzo translation. And then people saying that I turned against him. It was such a lot of old nonsense, to be honest. And then right towards the end of his life, he started calling some people venerable so-and-so, and other people not venerable. And the criteria was, basically, were they on his side or not? Anybody who disagreed with him, including Mike Latchford himself in the end, he was not venerable. You're only venerable if you are really upholding his view, you see. So pakṣa means view, and it means side first, and it means view. So it's kind of ironic that the conclusion of MMK is that the Buddha's teaching is towards abandoning all views. But as part of that effort, people take sides. People think their own view is right and take sides. And so you get sectarianism and all kinds of conflict. So, whose side are you on?
pakṣo gantā gacchatīti yasya tasya prasajyate gamanena vinā gantā gantur gamanam icchataḥ.